Nigeria's economic outlook is facing increasing scrutiny as the country struggles with rising debt and fiscal inconsistencies. Now, despite claims by the government of saving $20 billion through reforms like the removal of fuel subsidies and the devaluation of the naira, the Senate has approved a $2.2 billion loan to bridge the 2024 budget deficit. Critics, including civil society groups like Huriwa, question the legitimacy of these savings, demanding transparency on how the funds are being utilized. Nigeria's debt profile continues to rise, with total public debt reaching $138 trillion by November of 2024, exacerbating concerns over the country's ability to manage debt servicing costs. For a conversation on Nigeria's rising debt profile, deficit budget, and spiraling inflation, we're now joined by a professor of economics at the Lagos Business School, Professor Adi Bongo. Good afternoon, Professor. Many thanks for joining us here on Newsday.
Good afternoon, and thanks for having me this afternoon.
Of course. Now, at what exact debt-to-GDP ratio does Nigeria risk losing international credit credibility?
The thing about the debt to GDP is that it's not, a rigorous statistic that you could use to gauge performance. So in other words, it's not really a very a serious indicator of economics balance. Because you could see if you go to the United States or China or some European countries, you will see that their debt to GDP may range in excess of 100, 200, or even 300% sometimes. In fact, global debt to GDP is more than 300%. So in that case, it's not actually what we need to really consider when we, considering economic health as such. So that is why I'm not really very, it's kind of I'm ambivalent when talking about debt to GDP regarding its impact on ability to raise money or not. I think we need to consider a lot of other indicators. I share the concern of civil society groups and critics who are lampooning the government for, the ramp up in borrowing, especially to fund budgets. That is actually well grounded. But then we have to also consider the nature of the budgeting system. The budget itself is a development tool. And I think that is the only way the country is able to build the critical infrastructure to support the economic production. So a country that really wants to increase its productive potentials will enhance its budget system, make it efficient, and most importantly, productive. So what that means is that you have to budget according to what you want to achieve, and then ensure that there is a clear link between spending and impact on the economy. So that's what they call budget fungibility, the one-to-one linkage between a dollar spent or naira spent and then value that is derived. So that is what we need to pay attention to. That's one. And the second thing is that if you consider the size of our economy, the level of our infrastructure stock as a percentage of our GDP, so that now that we're talking about debt to GDP, you will see that whereas the debt to GDP ratio is rising, so whether it's 30, 40, or 50% as it is now, the stock of infrastructure to GDP has been declining. So even though the GDP has dropped significantly, but then infrastructure stock has also not increased in any way. So as far back as 2012, our infrastructure stock to GDP was around 35, some people say 20% actually. So the target then, especially when the National Integrated Infrastructure Master Plan was formulated, was to increase the stock of infrastructure to GDP to something to 70%. because according to the World Bank, benchmark, that is the level that is required to sustain something in the neighborhood of 5% growth of the GDP. Now, so if you look at countries like South Africa, their infrastructure stock to GDP is around 80%, and every productive country or the growth economies today, you will see that their infrastructure stock as a percentage of their GDP is above 70%. But in our own case, it's very much below that, which means we don't have the mechanism to power the growth that we desperately need. So what that means is that for us to build such, to enhance or ramp up our infrastructure stock, government budgets need to increase. Now, if we look at budget over time, in fact, our budget per capita, that is, if we divide the budget by the number of people in the economy by the population. So let's take 2025 budget that has been, that is on now. That's about 47 trillion. So if you convert it to dollar, it gives you around $28 billion. Now, if you take 220 million as the number of people living in Nigeria, the population, so divide that by by the budget by the population figure. So you get something around $121 or 220,000 naira per person. So if you compare that to other countries, let's say Ghana. Ghana is about $700 to the individual Ghanaian in terms of the budget. Then Kenya is a little above that. Countries like Libya, you have $5,000 per person when it comes to the budget per capita. So the question to ask is, what sort of infrastructure can you build with such level of budget? Not much. So we have huge infrastructure deficit, which needs to be addressed. But I'm not saying that it is the sole responsibility of government to provide infrastructure. Of course, it's the responsibility of government, but then the way to provide it, may vary. So we now have low budget, and then on top of that, we also have huge debt. So meaning that we have a kind of very critical situation, low budget, high level of debt. So we are caught between the devil and the deep blue sea.
All right,
So
Prof. Thank you so much.
Our budget, yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you for that. I think that's in alignment with what the chairman of the Presidential Committee on Fiscal Policy, Taiwo Oyedele, said earlier today, that Nigeria's budget is pretty low. And, a lot of authorities and experts in the fiscal sector have called for the fact that what we need to do is ensure that what the monies that are borrowed for are used for, well monitored, and that it's not really about the borrowing. I wonder what you make of that and how we can actually follow up or monitor and ensure that what the government borrows these monies for are actually implemented as and when due.
Yeah, we've been asking that question forever, and I think we'll also keep asking it in the years to come, because we still have the same institutional mechanism to monitor budget or ensure its implementation. We haven't changed, so it would be foolhardy to assume that anything will change since you still have the same governance structure. For me, if you really want to increase the impact of budget, which is the fungibility of budget, it's not just about talking or asking questions or asking the government, now we wait, government borrows money, and then we now begin to ask, okay, what would government do with the borrowed funds? It's about getting the government to change the system of project implementation. Time was in this country when we started talking about public-private partnership, okay, whereby to provide infrastructure, which is traditionally what the government responsibility. But government creates an incentive that allows the private sector with their expertise to step in. Now, that is a way of enhancing the efficiency of the delivery of public services and infrastructure and utilities and all of them. So if you change the mechanism of delivery, definitely there is no way you will not change, you will not achieve some record impact. But if you have not changed the governance or the delivery governance system, we still maintain the same way government borrows, government spends. And we don't have the capacity to monitor government. Even if we have the capacity to monitor government spending, do we have what it takes to enforce or to get them to do what they're supposed to do? We don't have that. So what we should be arguing for is a system that incentivizes private sector, that will come in with their own, market-driven, discipline to deliver those projects. Okay, some people may say, okay, if we go the PPP route or something, that might increase the cost of provision of services. But then we can't eat our cake and have it. So something has to give. Even if the cost is increased a little bit, and then we get the services that we pay for. I think that is better. So again, how does government fund the deficit is another way to looking at it. So you have budget deficit that government uses that as a justification for borrowing. We need to understand that borrowing is just one way of funding deficit. The other one would be monetization, which of course is inflationary. It will not ever require this government that we're already passing through this high bout of inflation to start printing money because they want to fund budgets. Okay? But there's this other one that is looking at us, staring us in the face, which is that government needs to rationalize its own expenditure. Okay? Now, that budget we are talking about, at the end of the day, it is budget that is mapped to the various government agencies. So we haven't seen a full, kind of a dedicated, pursuit of the implementation of the Orasanya report that everybody keeps talking about. So we had expected that this government will, implement that report, downsizing the government. There is a story making the rounds now regarding what has happened in Argentina in recent times. Okay, the budget deficit was so high, inflation was way, way beyond what it is in Nigeria currently. But the president, who the citizens started to call a madman, found a way and a method to that madness by cutting down government expenditure. So that is one way that could help the budget as well, if government can, cut down on its own spending. And then we also have some people have also been loud on that about government, trying to activate several dead assets that is under its watch and care. So if government can somehow find a way to convert those assets to, some valuable, instruments that could help the government, get some sort of a headroom when it comes to financing
Professor,
the budget deficit, not only borrowing.
Professor, I really appreciate the example that you gave regarding Argentina and how you like to see that reflected in Nigeria in terms of cutting expenditure. In about 45 seconds, from your assessment, why have we not seen this this administration being forthcoming about cutting back on expenditure?
Well, I think it has to do with the political exigencies. I think that should be a direct answer. But I had expected that the same way the president, was very bold, so audacious on the one to remove subsidy, go through, implement all these unwholesome reforms that I'm sure that not many people would have, broached if they had that opportunity. So that is a mark of boldness on his part. So we had also expected that he will, show such bold steps when it comes to, rationalizing the government machinery. But it's yes, there are some little that has happened in recent times, but that is not sufficient. So a lot more is expected. So asking me why that hasn't happened is a question that I'm not in a good position to answer. But I can say that, the politics of the day seem to be, perhaps constraining the president. But then we will be happy to see him, exert the same level of force, if I may use that phrase, that he did on the day of his inauguration to really stamp down on government spending.
Okay, we must leave the conversation here now, Professor. Thank you so much for the insightful comment that you've made on this issue of Nigeria's rising debt profile. We've been speaking with Professor Adi Bongo, Professor of Economics at the Lagos Business School.